But sometimes you kind of do have to use people's fatal flaws against them. So I've seen this play out with clients where there is a person, they love public recognition. You can leverage that person because that person doesn't matter in the spotlight, whether it's good press, bad press, or whatever. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Fast Forward Podcast, and we are continuing our series on power. Today, I'm going to be talking about the power of exposure, and I want to take it from a different angle. So we're not primarily not going to be talking about exposure that you would think of where you're pulling some big reveal or you're calling someone out, but rather we're going to talk about business exposure, and that relates to the calculation of a risk. So again, exposure could mean a number of different things, but the goal here is for us to think about what exposure can mean for our careers and our businesses in particular. And so for this episode of Out of Scope, I wanted to think of a character that is one of my faves because I love this movie, and that is Curtis from Dreamgirls. And so Dreamgirls is the fictional account of, well, it is the story of a fictional group, wink, wink, that's kind of based on maybe some real people, but we're going to leave that alone. And it's the story of the Dreams, who is an R&B group from Detroit, Michigan, my hometown. What up, though? And they are, of course, in the 60s, 70s, and I think it carries over into the 80s too, a group and how they have all of these issues. They split, their rise to fame, all of these internal conflicts. It's amazing. It's a musical. So it was originally a musical on Broadway. It was starring, oh goodness, Cheryl Lee Ralph, Loretta Devine, Jennifer. I was about to say Jennifer Hudson. She's in a new one. Jennifer Holliday. And then it's been remade a bunch of times. But the movie that I'm thinking of and that I'm focusing on for Out of Scope, this stars Jennifer Hudson, Beyonce, Anika Noni Rose, Jamie Foxx, Danny Glover, Eddie Murphy. It was just an amazing cast. So the soundtrack is amazing, like absolutely amazing. It's one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. But more than the soundtrack is amazing, it tells this incredible story of how people manipulate power, how people abuse power, how people discover their inner power. And at the center of that, I think it teaches us some great lessons about risk. Now, the villain of the story, who displays his villainous qualities over and over and over and over and over again, is going to be Curtis. And so Curtis is played by Jamie Foxx. He does a phenomenal job too, because first of all, y'all know Jamie Foxx is like literally a triple threat. So he can sing, dance, act. He's a comedian, so that's what, four, actually, probably five if we kept counting. But he is amazing at what he does, and he does not disappoint in this role. Throughout the story, though, we often define Curtis's actions by the negative impact that they have on others. And I do think that that has a lot of validity because, to be honest, he's the architect of a lot of the chaos in the story. But I like Curtis's character because I think that Curtis has an awareness. Curtis has an awareness of how far things can go in a good way, and he is willing to play almost like a game of chess to get to that end. And I think sometimes when a lot of us dream or a lot of us set goals, especially for our teams, if we're an internal business leader, or for our companies, if we're founders, we think so much of catering and sometimes coddling others along the way that we ignore. Sometimes you have to take some losses. And Curtis is always keenly aware of who needs to be sacrificed, what needs to be sacrificed, how much needs to be sacrificed to get to where they're going. Now, on the outside, it looks like he has no moral floor. So he's willing to do anything to get ahead. But to be completely honest, he does have an ethical and moral compass. It just ain't the same one that a lot of other people have. And it's probably not the one that we would want him to have. Let me also say this. I am not excusing some of the horrible things that he did. So he had some despicable ways. But the lesson that I want us to learn from Curtis is that risk is ours to analyze for our dreams. If we think about the way that some of us expect other people to think more of us, to always be cognizant of our needs, to always cater to our needs, that oftentimes causes us to miss opportunities, to miss signals and red flags that people maybe are not quite as allied with us as we would like. And sometimes it could lead to some very hurt feelings. And this is particularly true if you are someone who is the product of childhood trauma, maybe neglectful or abusive parents. Maybe you haven't really experienced mentorship and sponsorship or had the support and the care of leaders and authority figures throughout your life. And that could be at home, at school, in your early workforce experiences. It can be hard for us to pick up on signals, and it can be hard for us to self-advocate. And I use us because I'm in this. And when I was watching Dreamgirls again, because I was on this really long flight, I was looking for movies. I was flying on an airline that I normally don't go on. So I'm like, this movie selection sucks. And I'm trying to watch all this other stuff. Y'all, I was watching Lord of the Rings, like literally all three movies. I had time to watch all three of them. Y'all know that's like 10 hours. And on the way back, I'm like, I can't watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy again. Like, Lord, I love it. That's my favorite, but it ain't finna happen. So finally, I was like, oh, let me watch Dreamgirls instead of just listening to the soundtrack. Again, it's a musical, but in the movie, there's all these things that happen, of course, in between the songs. And so I was able to pick up on some things that I hadn't noticed in a while because I hadn't seen it in a few years. As I'm watching Curtis's character navigate change, the difference in geographic regions and all the politics that come along with that, I actually realized that I had a lot to learn from him. One of the things that I appreciate about Curtis, because there are three, actually four, that I think I'm going to bring out today. The first thing I appreciate about Curtis's character is that he is very good at recognizing talent. And by talent, not just the most outward talent. So, of course, this is about a singing group in the music industry. So the common sense thing would be that you see that people can sing. But he was very good at recognizing who had the greatest influence, who had the strongest sense of even fashion and style, who had the greatest likability and would be a better fit to be out front, who would be used as the convenient villain, right? So the ways in which he, in some ways, enabled Jimmy Early's character with the substance abuse and the extramarital affairs as a way to create and even continue to hype up this image. All of that is a part of harnessing talent, to be quite honest. I think sometimes we describe talent development, of course, in positive terms. So do you see who's the emerging leader? Do you see who has great public speaking skills? But sometimes talent development means kind of pulling in some of those fatal flaws and helping to develop those too. The reality is, as a leader, people have both light and shadow sides. And I talked about that in the other Out of Scope episode with Jack McCoy. We all have parts of our character that are amazing, and then we have parts of our character that, to be honest, can be kind of ugly. But even ugly things can be useful. And so, for example, he leverages Effie's need to be seen as the power source in the group, the final decision maker. He leverages that to get the group to come on board. And I watched it again because I think I originally thought that he was always managing them. But the reality is he played everybody in that first scene when they were at the talent show at the Detroit Theater. He wasn't nobody manager. I think that man was just there, like just waiting for an opportunity. And he didn't know if Jimmy Early and his people was going to accept them and take them on tour. But he could see, okay, Jimmy Early got all these issues. He liked to sleep with the women. So then women just left. Okay, bet. Let me see these other three girls over there. They desperate to get on. Okay. But I see her. She the leader of the group. If I could pull her in. That's actually a talent to be able to see all of those things and then not just see and notice them, but see them, notice them, and then string it together in a plot to get to an expected end. Again, I know we are taught that that is, poo-pooed upon. You shouldn't be doing that as a leader. But sometimes you kind of do have to use people's fatal flaws against them. So I've seen this play out with clients where there is a person who always has to get the credit. Like they love public recognition. So sometimes you can leverage that person to deliver bad news that other people would shy away from because that person doesn't matter in the spotlight, whether it's good press, bad press, or whatever. So if they cool with being a public mouthpiece, okay, well, I'm going to let you be the spokesperson for this particular project, right? Then there are other people who they hate the spotlight and they don't want to be out front and they don't want to be in front of other people. Okay, well, you know what? We got a whole bunch of reports that we have to do for this particular project. Can you work on this? Is this skill set? Yep. Okay, so your need to be in the background and in the shadows is going to work for us because we got this whole basket of things that other people would hate to do. They might even mess it up and sabotage it if they get assigned to it. We're going to put you on this, right? And so understanding, again, what is your end goal, what you're working toward, and then moving toward that, that's going to be your best buddy. The second thing that I noticed about Curtis's character that I don't think I had recognized before, he is emotionally aware, but not emotionally dependent. A part of what he accomplishes with all of these groups, because in the movie, Rainbow Records, that's his record label in the movie, they end up being just this powerhouse in the industry. He is able to accomplish that because he recognizes people's feelings, but he doesn't let them be the compass by which he makes decisions. And again, this is one of those things that, especially nowadays in leadership, no, you should be sensitive to things and sensitive to other people and emotionally intelligent. And I get that. So self-awareness is the first pillar of emotional intelligence. Totally get that. Self-management is the second. And I think sometimes in the pursuit of self-awareness of our emotions, we forget the importance of self-management. The other side to emotional intelligence is relational awareness. So being aware and being able to temperature check what we call reading the room. But then the next level to that is relationship management. So how do we allow other people's emotions to determine how we move and navigate in those relationships? The key principle of what is called emotional hijacking is typically that you let external influences move your internal emotional compass. And so, for better or for worse, Curtis is able to effectively manage relationships. And I say effectively because the goal is to get everybody to financial success and fame. And so it's like, hey, Effie, sorry that you hurt because I don't want to be your boyfriend no more, but we got a chance to perform at this big old, Las Vegas show. And normally black singing groups never get to do this. And we supposed to be singing, I think it was like New Year's Eve. Oh, well, you got to go. Again, I'm not saying he was clearly very shady because he was doing this in the pursuit of being able to be with a particular woman who was also in the group. But I kind of like, we about to lose this big old opportunity that's about to propel us to stardom, and did, because you mad because we breaking up. Like, I kind of understand, dude. I've had to make decisions like that. I am not one who is easily swayed myself. Um, and so I think I have a deeper appreciation for that, maybe than some others. But you need that at times. And I think some leaders who we perceive as being so cold, Miranda from Devil Wears Prada, who we talked about in another episode, she's another really good example. We talked about how Big Meech's character in BMF is like that too. Some of the greatest leaders that I've seen who we also ironically perceive as villains are very good at separating emotions from their decisions. And you can't always make decisions from a place of emotion as a leader. Sometimes you can. Sometimes that's actually very useful. But a lot of times you have to be emotion agnostic. And if you don't learn that skill as a leader, and again, learn to balance self management with relationship management as it relates to emotional intelligence, you are going to be constantly swayed. And while that may make you very popular among your direct reports, so those vertical down facing relationships, it will probably make you laughing stock among your peers, and it will probably make you seem very unreliable and weak to your superiors and to the folks above you. So you have to be very thoughtful about it. The third thing that I would like us to notice about Curtis is that he was very clear on his motivation. It's interesting because I was watching in the movie, obviously, as they obtain more success and he gets more and more money, the house, of course, becomes much more lavish and all these things. But it was clear from the very beginning that he was motivated by being at the top. And all the trappings that go along with being at the top, it's like, that's fine. But in the movie, he didn't have a whole bunch of girlfriends. I mean, he had a serious relationship with Effie, which was probably just to get the group on board. And then he had a serious relationship, which led to a marriage with Dina, who arguably he loved, but also saw as a tool. But he didn't really get caught up in, oh, I need more things. It was quite simply to be like the best businessman that perhaps the music industry, and maybe he even had aspirations of what people would think is the best businessman in the world. Like, that was his motivation. And I think as a leader, that is very important because I've noticed this in my own career. As you go up in your career, whether that's up in money, title, status, prestige, notoriety, and fame, a lot of stuff comes along with that. That's what people talk about with like lifestyle creep, where it's like, oh, I get all of these extra things and I need a bigger house, a bigger car. But we lose sight of the fact that that's not really what motivates us. So when we think about, actually, in my book, Evolution to Equity, I talk about the 4 motivations and how they are self-actualization, money, prestige, and safety. And if you are not aware of your motivation ratio, because it's never usually just 1 versus 3, it's a mix of all 4. And if you're not aware of your current motivation ratio, because it does shift, you will easily be swayed by the things that motivate others. And then that leads to mission creep, or the distraction and the deflection away from what truly matters to you. Curtis never wavers from that. Again, he didn't care who had to get sacrificed, what relationship had to get sacrificed, what was going on, to be the absolute best. And even when he essentially got blackmailed by Danny Glover and Effie and Cece's character, who was Effie's brother, biological brother in the cast. He was just like, fine, okay, I'll pay y'all out. Cool, you want you a little record label, that's fine. Because the goal was to not get exposed by being a businessman who played dirty. He knew that that was what was needed in that time frame in order to get to what he needed to get to. But the cost of exposure was too great. And that was his risk analysis. So now, this is how I want to pull this in. I told you the title of this episode is The Power of Exposure. And analyzing cost versus benefit in risk analysis is very important because, like I said, you have to know your own motivation, because what's a benefit to me may be a cost to someone else. You have to understand the players who are involved and what triggers their emotions so that you don't create emotional enmeshment. You're very clear on the types of decisions that you need to make. And you also need to have an awareness of what it is that accomplishment means to you. All of that is a part of risk analysis. When you think about risk exposure, so risk exposure, the official business definition, and let me pull this up so I can say it exactly right. The amount that an investor, and this is coming from Investopedia, so shout out to them. Financial exposure is the amount that an investor can potentially lose in an investment. Okay. And there are actually two types of exposure. So it's financial exposure and market exposure. So if we just think about it from the financial side, but it could apply to both, it's really you looking at what do you stand from lose? What do you stand to lose in this investment? And in Curtis's case, he was very clear that though he could have been a successful local car dealer, right? He was selling Cadillac cars and arguably doing pretty good at it in Detroit. That's a prestige brand, always has been. He recognized that for him to avoid taking the risk of investing in the Dreams and becoming their manager and starting this record label eventually, that he would lose the chance to become a global icon. He then recognized that to lose the relationship with Effie would mean that he got the chance to go with the arguably bigger star, because he saw that star power in Dina, and maintain that global icon status to further that vision. He recognized that the music industry was changing and that staying in Detroit wasn't going to be as profitable as moving to LA. And so while moving to LA and moving the headquarters to LA was a huge risk, they could then get into movies and TV and have access to Hollywood and all of that exposure, because at that time TV was becoming a bigger sensation. Again, it's the 60s, 70s and stuff like that. He then recognized that R&B, as they knew it, was kind of fading out among global unrest. And I think it was probably like around the Vietnam War, the riots and all of that stuff. So he's like, all right, we're moving into disco and we want to get into funk and have fun with the music and stay that way. That ended up being a really good choice. When you think about the power of exposure, it is you being willing to have clear understanding of what is a benefit for you versus what is a cost. But then it's also being willing to assess and weight those benefits and costs appropriately. And that is based on both your own internal motivations and the external environment. That's a tough thing to do. It's something that you have to continuously balance. It's not always going to be one answer. It's not always going to be one right solution. One thing that I have taken away from some of the greatest leaders I've known is that while they plan for long term, they make the best decision that they can in that moment. And they constantly make decisions. When you get stuck in that analysis paralysis, and I'm just not going to do anything because I don't know what to do, and that's scary, you end up making things way worse than they would be, even if you made the quote unquote wrong decision, because you had the gall to choose something. I haven't always had the best outcomes. I've had to restart my life over and over again several times, but at least I made a decision. I did something. I didn't just do nothing and just wait and I hope somebody. You got to decide something. What I hope you all take away from this, and especially now, I think this is a good moment to think about this because we're in the middle of watching a lot of kind of scary things happen all over the world in business and politics and global relations, international relations. I mean, it's a lot going on, but you still got to decide. You still got to do something. You still got to make a choice. You cannot remain stuck and stagnant. That does nobody any favors. And even if you make a choice and make a decision that ends up being the wrong decision in hindsight, like Curtis did, you at least can pull out some nuggets to grow from and course correct from there. All right. So That's Exposure. That's our buddy Curtis. If you have never watched Dreamgirls, if you haven't checked it out in a long time, please go watch it again. This is the version with Beyonce, Jennifer Hudson, and Nika Noni Rose and Jamie Foxx. You will love it. I've been bumping this soundtrack ever since I came back, and I was bumping it while I was out of town, having a blast. Wonderful music, some of the best R&B I probably done ever heard. I ain't gonna lie to y'all. But tell me in the comments, what does Curtis's character mean for you? What do you think were some of his fatal flaws? What do you think were some of the things you love? What about your own exposure analysis? How do you calculate exposure in your own life, in your own career, in your own business? Let me know in the comments. And of course, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm going to catch you in the next one. Bye, y'all.